Good evening, everyone. I'm Steve Katz, Chair of the Architecture Committee of the National Arts Club, and I welcome you here tonight on behalf of the Board of Governors of the National Arts Club and each and every one of the members of the Architecture Committee. A special thanks tonight to Patty Abel, over there, who organized this program. And it was no mean feat to organize this program. A couple of small announcements. First, join our community. There's a sign-up sheet in the rear for a mailing list. We have a growing community of architecture fans, and you'll be invited to a lot of very interesting events throughout the course of the year if you do. So carefully print your name and email address, and you will receive invitations for a wide variety of programs throughout the year. Also, the Architecture Committee presents tours of this magnificent mansion that we call our home, and they are architecture and history tours. And we present them monthly during the week and on weekends, varying dates, and they are open to members and members' guests. Then I'd like to say that we have a spectacular lineup of programs coming up in the 2017-2018 season. I'll just mention a couple of highlights here. We'll kick off the season in the fall with the internationally renowned Caesar Pelli, who'll be here. A man who has created something like 50 masterpiece buildings around the world. He'll be here in September. In October, we'll be talking about the magnificent Donald McDonald glass that exists in this world. The most magnificent example is the glass dome above our bar room. And if you haven't seen it, go take a look. In November, PBS walking tour expert Barry Lewis will be here. He's a wonderful, beloved character, and he knows more about history of New York neighborhoods than just about anybody. In January, Patrick Schumacher, the heir to the Zaha Hadid architecture firm and architecture extraordinaire himself, will be here talking about his views on what's going on in architecture today. So once again, we have a rich season of very wonderful architecture events coming. Please join us for those. I'd like to say a couple words about the program. You've probably all read the introduction, but I'll read what I have here. We're going to have a wonderful program tonight about the magical city of Venice. And often the first reaction to Venice is one of feeling overwhelmed by the astonishing beauty of her existence. Yet if we dig a bit deeper, inherent contradictions begin to appear. How do we make rational sense of a city that floats on water? What are the features that contribute to our incredulity, and what can we learn from them? From the original muddy wilderness of the 5th century to a beguiling built environment, Venice remains 1,500 years later a provocative paradox of visceral and visual inspiration. And I'm sure if you've been to Venice, you feel that way. And if you haven't been to Venice, you should. The evening will be an exploration into the remarkable architectural elements that make Venice unique in the world. And the participants are all contributors to Dream of Venice architecture, where they reflect on how Venice has influenced their lives and work. The book is second in a series that has been developed by Joanne Lochtov to celebrate Venice as a contemporary living city. Joanne will join the panel later. She's not there right now. And I should mention that a portion of the proceeds from the books that will be for sale afterwards about this is donated to the foundation Quirini Stampalia, I think I have that right, to support their architecture programming in Venice. And our distinguished panel, Cynthia Davidson, James Biber, and Max Levy, will be introduced by Louise Braverman. Louise Braverman is a New York architect. She's the lady on the right as you look at the panel. As a New York-based architect who's been invited to exhibit at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2012, 2014, and 2016. Working locally and globally, her firm has recently designed medical staff housing in Kigutu, Burundi, and art museums in Botiças, Portugal, and Riverdale, New York.
A long way from Portugal and Burundi.
One final mention, we'll have some light refreshments at the conclusion of the program. We have Prosecco tonight, and some cookies, our legendary cookies, as I like to say. And we're missing our legendary punch. So right now, I'd like to introduce Joanne Lochtov, who will introduce the panel. Joanne?
Yeah, actually, thank you so much for having us here tonight. It's incredible. I'm actually not going to introduce the panel. Louise is, but I want to thank you all very much for coming, and we'll have a Q&A at the end, and I'll join them if they let me, and I can answer some questions about the book in particular if you wish. Thank you.
Okay.
Welcome. We have a great group here tonight with varied perspectives on Venice. On the right, I'm sorry, I guess it's on your left, is Max Levy, FAIA, is a Dallas-based architect where he seeks to bring sun, wind, rain, and sky into play architecturally. In the center, we have Cynthia Davison, who was a
Could you bring the mics forward, please?
How's that?
Sorry
about that. Should I keep doing it?
Oh, no.
No.
I got the general idea.
Yeah, okay. In the center, we have Cynthia Davison, who is the co-curator of the USA Pavilion for the 2016 Venice Architecture Biennale. She's a writer, great note, I must say, and editor of the architectural journal Law, which you might all want to check out, and the Writing Architecture series published by MIT Press. That's what that is. James Bieber, who is right next to me, FAIA, designed the USA Pavilion at the Expo Milan in 2015. His firm has designed a wide range of projects from private residences and museums to restaurants and schools. So, we have this book. I don't know how many of you have looked at it, but it's a series of personal essays that great people like we have here tonight wrote about not only their factual information about Venice, but their experience of Venice. And a lot of the input is thoughtful and challenging and heartfelt, and so I thought we'd start tonight with our panelists here each one reading what they wrote, and then I have questions for each of you. So we'll start with you, Max.
Okay. Better give me a book, though.
Yeah.
Why? Mine's the shortest one. For all its floating qualities, Venice is heavily laden with history, stone, and gravity. Though its marble monuments aspire artfully upwards, they're ultimately more preoccupied with down than up. One counterpoint to all this weight is the prominent wind vane poised lightly atop the Punta del Degano. This figure of fortune presiding over the Vicino's daily ballet of watercraft pirouettes between architecture and flight. It has for centuries signaled the comings and goings of Adriatic weather that tints the city's beguiling atmosphere. For some, perhaps, it pivots to the ebb and flow of dreams as well. Amen.
So my question to you, Max, is, if Venice is heavily laden with history, stone, and so forth, like you discussed, and gravity, would you feel that Venice is not a progressive place, or how do you feel about that aspect? Because you speak of its past.
Yeah, I was making a distinction between Venice's weighty history and weighty marble infrastructure in contrast to its weightless, dreamy quality. And as a matter of fact, I think the dreamy quality is the aspect of Venice that has something to say to us as we move forward addressing urban design problems today. I don't know if you want to go into all that right now.
Well,
or
why not?
just
A little bit. What do you mean by the dreamy?
Well, Venice is high in spirit. You know, it's because it's a very spiritual and poetic place. As soon as you start to try to talk about that aspect of it, it just sort of vaporizes. But I think what it has to say to us is, well, or let me put it this way: that Venice is, as you know, deluged daily by a flood of tourists. And I think one thing that tells us, I mean, aside from the cruise ship business, I think it tells us that people hunger for atmosphere. I think most of our attention in approaching urban design problems is on efficiency and practicality. And I think we've all seen that this often yields alienating places. There's not enough heart put in it. There's not enough, it's probably best to use the Italian word, atmosphere. So that, I think that's just putting my toe in the water on that subject.
Well, Cynthia, being that in the last Biennale you were very involved with Detroit, and in terms of urban design, how do you think Max's statement about urban design and what might be missing from urban design affected what you did and how you looked at Detroit, or your group did?
They're not here to hear about Detroit. But I will say that I think that the reason we wanted to do the Architecture Biennale about Detroit was to bring architects to the table in the discussions about what needs to happen in that city. That architects bring something, I believe, that urban designers and landscape architects don't do. They think differently. And I think some of them think in terms of atmosphere, or another Italian expression, sprezzatura. So that what we tried to do with the Biennale is assign 12 architects to 4 different sites in Detroit and ask them to come up with a speculative, imagined idea that might be something people in Detroit could learn from, that would enliven the city in new ways, in surprising ways. So it's probably, but this got nothing to do with Venice.
Right, it's as close to the atmosphere, and I guess what you did in Venice. So why don't you go ahead and read your essay?
Okay. It looks very long. I'll try to read it quickly. I'll give a caveat. When I'm an editor, I'm always begging writers to get their pieces done. And Joanne was beating me with a whip. As a writer, I'm terrible about making deadlines. And then when I sent it in, she said, "Oh, we're very surprised. Yours is so different." The first time I saw Venice, my hair was long and my skirt short. The hair long enough and blonde enough to attract 2 Italian soldiers on holiday as I was strolling along the sun-splashed lagoon. The skirt far too mini for the decency standards one had to meet to enter the gilded realm of St. Mark's Basilica. That night, the soldiers somehow tracked my brunette friend and me to our student hotel in Mestre and noisily tried to break into our room. The next morning, sleep-deprived and wearing a borrowed modest raincoat, I returned to St. Mark's and the quiet of its sanctum. For 21 years, those were my vivid memories of Venice, not the exotic Moorish architecture, not the deep darkness of the Cali at night, not the canals awash with motion. Then I made the second of what is now many visits. Too warmly dressed in a white tuxedo shirt and a pair of black velvet leggings, I sweated through the September parties for the 5th Venice Architecture Biennale. But as I waited for the Vaporetto at the Giardini stop, the sound of every wave slapping against the fondamento was like a soothing mantra. Though water can be cruel, that day it cast a spell. Venice may be too hot,
too cold, too humid, too crowded, or too easy to get lost in, but her streets, through which the fish swim while the black gondola slides spectrally over the green water, as Hans Christian Andersen eloquently stated, release us to imagine alternatives to the general standard of urban living. Venice is not on the sea, but of the sea, eclipsing the tale of Atlantis with a modern mythology, both repeated and rewritten with every tide.
Okay, great. So you talked about releases us to imagine alternatives.
She's going to deconstruct the text now.
It's kind of interesting. I like the skirt part very much, by the way. The hair, the long, yep, and the repetitive.
Been
skirt.
there, haven't you?
Yeah. But, so these alternatives, I mean, what types of alternatives? Like autonomous driving? I mean, what kind of things would you think of that Venice brings to mind, or that might relate to now or the future?
I think that, I don't think you can make a literal translation because I can't attest to the travels of someone like Ben Thompson when he was developing all these waterfront facilities, Boston Harbor, riverfronts everywhere, those sort of festival marketplaces that mushroomed in the 70s and early 80s in this country. But I think that Venice is a place that if you don't already appreciate water, you learn that water is important for an urban condition. Maybe it's because I'm a Pisces. But you do? Hi. And that water is soothing, as I say. It's both dangerous and fantastic. Water is part of the atmosphere. For me, water is the most beguiling thing about Venice, and one has to think about the fact that it forces you to walk everywhere you go. And recently, the Seine flows through Paris, but more people walk in Paris than any other European city other than Venice. I mean, why don't more of us walk? Why do we hop in cars, not Manhattan, but hop in cars, hop in trucks, whatever? It makes you think about how you navigate the city and how might you do it differently, and are narrow spaces okay versus very broad spaces. I mean, the water forces certain conditions that I think make you think about how you might inhabit a city.
Okay. You want to continue with, and let's hear.
Sorry.
Yes.
You've really disoriented me with the whole Pisces thing, so now I'm really going to reconsider this. Now I understand why I'm so drawn to this. While it's hard not to love all of Venice, I most love the Venice of Elio Renata Trinconato. Her exquisite drawings plumb the relationship between the grand and the modest, between houses and housing in Venice, while exploring the extraordinary rationality behind the seemingly picturesque city. The hidden dimension revealed in her 1948 book, Venezia Minora, is as ruthlessly modern and efficient as any developer today, but with a Palladian sense of proportion, scale, and elegance. Celebrating the commonplace can be tiresome, or at least a quaint exercise, but with Trinconato, the underlying structural relationship between the palazzo, the casa, the casetta are clarified, having the effect of making every Venetian building a study in grandeur. This may be at odds with our love of the worn, layered, sagging relic that Venice presents today. Her book forces us to confront the precision and intentionality, the complexity and the logic of Venetian living. This seems to me to be the essential contradiction of Venice, a place of romance that is as cool and calculating as surgery, with its picturesque facades masking an unmatched sophistication of plan and circulation. A city that appears to be a relaxed, tourist-driven playground, while in fact it is a well-tuned machine, struggling against the incredible contextual odds to function with a sense of normalcy. The illusion of ease and simplicity is an Italian trait, but in Venice it is high art. Trinconato's hand-drawn elevations, plans, perspectives, and renderings are a seemingly casual sketch of mid-century and even last century Venice, but are in fact a highly ordered survey of the city from the well-known to the vernacular, all imprinted with the signature of its most acute observer. I love Trinconato's Venice because I see it as Venice stripped of superficial beauty while revealing its deeper allure. Italo Calvino describes Venice that is magically everything and everywhere. Trinconato describes the hidden intelligence of Venice exercised over centuries.
It's terrific. And now, I'm very intrigued with what you speak about as the Venetian ease and Italianese in general. And what do you think triggers this? And not only triggers it, but can you go into a little more specifics about it? Because we all know what that, I mean, many of us who spend time in Venice or Italy, and that there's a certain way of behaving, and you speak to that.
You know, it's funny. I once was having dinner with I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. Is that better?
I'll move it. So I was having dinner with an Italian, an elegant Italian woman, and I was positing that, you know, in Washington, currency is power. You know, it's all political power, and in LA, it's all celebrity, and in New York, it's literally currency. It's, you know, commerce. And I said, so what is it in Milan? And without, she didn't think for a second. She said, well, it's how you look. You know, and it is true that kind of cultural emphasis on exterior appearance, cordiality, the importance of always saying buongiorno, always saying hello. There's a kind of formal elegance to the kind of cultural day. And so that may be just a kind of cultural trait, and that may be Italian more than Venetian. But you know, I think there may be more to it. I think that there's something. You know, I was thinking about I haven't read this for a while, but I remembered that this idea that the precision of a city, that the real intelligence of a city is kind of masked behind this very soft and sinking and sort of sagging exterior, is exactly the opposite of where we live. You know, so we live in an island that is strapped by this incredibly precise grid, that all of the kind of rigor is on the outside. You know, it's all on the street, and all of the kind of confusion, so to speak, is behind the walls. And I love the idea that it's the other way around, that, you know, someone once said, I think it was actually a doorman at a fancy hotel, I said, you know, people can come in wearing virtually anything, but you've always got to look at the shoes, and that pretty much gives it away. And so Venice has really great shoes.
I'm sorry, excuse me. Excuse me, Louise. I got these in Venice.
One can't plan those things, exactly.
It was my gift to myself after the Biennale last year.
Well done.
Thank you.
So while we're at it, I'd like to show you my shoes that I got last year in Venice after the Biennale. So anyway, a little different. I like the red.
It's a very good place to buy shoes. Yes.
So what do we think about the paradox? I mean, there really is a paradox. There really is, excuse me, a paradox that between the precision and the surface ease. And is that a dying art, or is that something that we should learn from here in New York, maybe, in the subway? Or is that something that can be continued, or should be continued, or is inauthentic, possibly? You know, do you have any thoughts on that, coming from Texas?
I don't know, you mentioned paradox. I mean, Venice is when you build a city on water, the DNA of that city is going to be paradox. And I think that the pervasive paradox in Venice for me has to do with nature. Venice is so thoroughly interwoven by nature, by way of water. And nature is thoroughly interwoven with this mysterious soothing quality. And so you stroll through Venice with great ease, And you register that soothing quality, la serenissima, serene public. But the paradox is that you also, even though you're supposedly at ease, at the same time you see constantly traces of the other side of nature, which is this terrifying indifference to the human world. And so you've got that particular paradox, which I guess resonates so much with all of us, because it's sort of a model of life. Life is sweet, you're all doomed. Sorry.
I have to follow this up because I thought this was going to be a really serious evening. So I've been preparing. And I have been reading, but I haven't finished, a book called City of Fortune, which some of you may know, by Roger Crowley. And the Venetian history is so violent and so corrupt because there was nothing there. They had no nature in 1000 or in 500, but certainly not in the end. They were forced, once they settled on this little chain of islands, they had salt, eel, and some kind of fish. I forgot what the fish is. That's all they had to trade with. They needed everything else. They needed lumber for ships. They needed cloth. They needed dishes. They needed everything. The only way to do that was to build ships and start conquering all the territories around you or to trade. So the global, probably one of the major global trading, early trading cities when it was a republic was Venice. I mean, it's an extraordinary model, but also a very violent one. And right now, in the siege of Constantinople, where the Doge Dandolo is, boy, throwing everything at Constantinople he can. And of course he wins. And they triumphed, they ruled the Mediterranean for 300 years before the Ottomans come. But it was a very violent, in defiance of Pope Innocent III in Rome. So when you look at what all those riches at St. Mark's and the lions, that was all stolen.
Yes.
All stolen from Constantinople. It's really extraordinary. What we love about that city is the spoils of war.
It's strange having...
Which is a huge paradox, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when you
It's
think about
like the paradox of visiting a battlefield, a former battlefield. All the horrible stuff that went on there, and yet battlefields are some of the most serene places.
now.
Yes,
Now.
that's what I mean. And so Venice, we enjoy the soothing quality of Venice now, but it was forged with a lot of bad stuff.
It's the water that's soothing.
Yes.
I really think it's the water.
I agree.
I think I'm going to read what I wrote because I wrote about paradoxes. That's okay. That's okay because we can continue this after this. So when I hear the voice of Venice, can you hear me? My mind wanders into that nebulous space where time momentarily stops and I'm quietly propelled into an intimate dialogue with my own free-floating thoughts. The voice of Venice thankfully reminds me that there is an arena in which fantasy and reality can collide, coexist, and comfortably accommodate contradictions. Venice, for me, is a metaphor for those unexpected creative possibilities. This notion never fails to captivate me. Spatially, Venice amplifies the joys of the unanticipated, variegated pleasures inherent in the experiencing of architecture. What a delight it is to feel the opening and closing of space as you amble down a narrow, noisy cobblestone street at the canal's edge, which miraculously transforms into the enormous expansiveness of Piazza San Marco. This, of course, is always in the context of savoring a series of sensuous changes in scale, from the tiniest mosaic to the vastness of the surrounding sea. Temporally, Venice embodies similar aesthetic contradictions. While it is the living history of handcrafted costumes and masked balls, hiding surreptitiously behind thick textural stone walls. It is simultaneously the contemporary global exchange of cutting-edge artistic critical thought emanating from the continuous cycle of art and architecture biennales. Whether frivolous or substantial, Venice is a place where at any moment something mysteriously intriguing may happen. It is the native soil of an open-ended spirit of creative opportunity. Knowing that this free space exists situates me in the expansive realm of inventive ideas that is the essence of my artistic process. For this, as an architect, I am thankful. Okay, so I think that is about this paradox that we're all talking about here, but how, as creative people that we all are, do you feel that this stimulates you? It does stimulate me. It's a contradiction of place. How do you feel about that, Jim?
Well, you know, it's interesting because, we all love to visit ruins, but of course that's not at all what they were. I think that's exactly what we're seeing in Venice. We're looking at effectively the ruin of a place that we would barely recognize. And I do think that there's a kind of romanticism that with the softened edges take on a kind of romanticism that I think is almost unfair in a way to think of the place as being so casual, so windy. It's, from my point of view, so unbelievably deliberate, and every facade on the Grand Canal is an incredible sort of play of geometry. Even the little sort of measuring stick ticking, shadow markers. So that I feel that it's, that it does, through the slightly shabby clothes, through the slightly worn jeans, really show itself. The intelligence and the precision and the deliberateness and the sort of strong geometry still reads through me. So I still see that, and I wonder whether we'd all like the original, the cleaned up version. The way everybody gets very upset when they clean the cathedral, Milan or something like that, the Duomo. And I think it really strips away everyone's preconceived notion of the softness of the place. So I think that is a paradox.
Well, that is an interesting, but you could take it a further extreme today with some people think of it as a tourist trap. There are these enormous ships that come in, and the streets are overcrowded or crowded. And is that a contradiction as well? How do you feel about that?
About the streets being overcrowded, there are only about probably 2% of the streets overcrowded with all those tourists. One of the things about Venice that I love is that the tourists just stay in Piazza San Marco pretty much. And you have the entire rest of the city pretty much to yourself. That's why I think it's such a dreamy place to not be where the tourists are. You can rely on the fact that they won't go anywhere.
Oh, well, that's, do you agree with that, Cynthia? Do you think they're locked off in one place, the tourists? And then
Yes and no. The day tourists only go on the Fundamenta Lagoon and St. Mark's, and they stop. They only go in St. Mark's and the Fundamenta along the lagoon, the Bridge of Sighs, and Rialto. They go to Rialto. They go up the Grand Canal to Rialto. But the people who are there for 2, 3, 4 days, they really are permeating the city. It's just not in droves.
Yeah.
When I stayed there last year for a month, this time last year, to install the exhibition in the U.S. Pavilion, I stayed in the apartment of a friend who has a very large house on the far side, away from the lagoon. He's lived in Venice for 20 years. He is Italian. He taught at the university for many years. And he wants to sell the house. He feels Venice is no longer a place he can be, that the tourists are filtering back where he is now. And I saw them living there and having the great privilege to have a place I had to be every day, walking the same route, stopping and buying the same coffee, pretending I was Venetian for 3.5 weeks. Great role to play. But I began to see what he was talking about, because if I weren't back there visiting him, I wouldn't have noticed it. I weren't back there staying there. But not in the droves you're talking about. There's a difference between the day boat and the people who come and stay.
Yeah, and if you took that, same question about sort of the original Venetians and the people coming in, it leads to another whole issue to think about preservation. Should Venice be the place that it was, and new people coming in, whether they're tourists or may have different values, how do you integrate those two, or do you? And is that a bad thing for the history?
Well, it seems to be that there are a lot of different ways to arrive in a city, and if you arrive on a gigantic liner that embarks 1,000 people, 2,000, 3,000 people at the same time, you're not really entering the city. You're kind of landing in the city. But if you arrive even at the train station, at the airport, and you take a boat to Venice, and you're kind of drawn in exactly the pace and exactly the scale. And I think it is actually, tourist or not, kind of the right way to enter a city. That it's not just the hordes of people that are all of a sudden flooding the piazzas, but it's also the scale, these objects that sit in the lagoon at a scale that is monumental. We would no more allow these things to park on Park Avenue if they could, then it would be an absurd thing. And so the idea that these boats are allowed, that these boats are encouraged for commercial tourist reasons, it seems to me that they're both polluting the lagoon terribly, they're polluting the visual atmosphere, and completely ruining what is almost an uninterrupted scene of non-modernity, except for them. And it seems to me that that's just completely wrong.
Well, would you call it is Venice an uninterrupted place of non-modernity? That's an interesting concept. What is that? Is that what it is, or is it?
Well, as a frame, as fabric it is, and as interiors and people, it's not. But when you introduce kind of modernity at that scale, machines at that scale, I think it's just the visual destruction of the place. It seems as though that's an easy thing to put somewhere else, to have the smaller boats. Because it also robs those people of the actual experience of slowly being drawn into a city of water. How can you do that if you kind of arrive on that? So,
but don't you think most people don't want to really have that experience? That's why they're on that boat. They're coming. They chose to run around the Adriatic on a cruise ship, and they stay on the cruise ship for as long as they're in Venice. They might eat lunch in Venice, but not breakfast and dinner because they paid for it on the cruise. And it's just like coming to take that photo, that selfie, all those selfie sticks in front of the Bridge of Sighs. But that's what the trade of Venice is today. What else do they have to sell but itself?
Well, the Lascaux, the caves, famous caves in France, they're so delicate now that the humidity from visitors destroys them. And so about 100 yards away, they've built a perfect digital, full-scale replica of the caves of Lascaux. And people go to the site, but are not permitted to go to the actual caves, but go to this simulacrum. So my suggestion is that we just do the same thing. For those people who just need the selfies,
They can just go to Las Vegas.
you can go exactly. I guess you're right. I guess you're exactly right.
Well, there could be miniaturized. This could become. They could roll them out in various places as well. Traveling Venice.
Floating Venice.
I think that if we're going to talk about boats, have all of you ridden in a gondola?
I never had.
Okay, so 3-1. But I only did it once with my little son, because you don't do that, right? But what I really loved about, when you talk about the history of Venice, what I love is Henry James's aspirin papers. When the nameless protagonist calls his gondolier, his private gondolier who comes in the evening to pick him up and take him down to St. Mark's so he can take a drink and listen to the orchestra in the square.
Wow.
And you can still do that. What else do we need? I mean, that's extraordinary. This is Henry James writing about, the turn of the last century. Here we are, more than 100 years later, we can do the exact same thing.
Well,
There's something about that city that is magic, that you can do that.
But do you think that, I mean, is it only in Venice, or is this a model in any way for maybe not miniaturization or rollout, but what could we learn from this place? I mean, in terms of other cities that may not have this specialness. Like in Dallas, what do you think in Dallas?
Oh, Lord. I would have to think on that for a while. I will say this. I was with Adam Urinsky earlier today. He is the architect with ARO. They restored the Judd Foundation here in town, and the Donald Judd studio, home studio. And since I'm from Texas, we started talking about Marfa. And we started talking about some, stay with me on this, some very dim parallels between Marfa and Venice. Hold on. In Venice, the sea moves through the city. In Marfa, the prairie moves through the city. In Venice, Venice suffers from too much water. Marfa suffers from not enough. Venice is a dying city that is redeemed by art. Marfa is a dying little town that is redeemed by art. Venice has this immense patrimony of art. Marfa has this little contemporary patrimony of art. But all across America, small towns are dying, and Marfa is thriving right now because of art. Marfa has been sort of picked clean in a Donald Judd fashion. I don't know, there is some model there. I mean, one, I think, brilliant thing that Judd did when he came in and bought the town was he restored these buildings in a way where, as I say, he just would pick them clean and then shut up. He didn't do any interpretation. And they're basically unremarkable buildings. They have the silence of an Edward Hopper painting, But because he was simply true to them and then just let them be, they're very powerful. And maybe, as I say, maybe that's a model. Maybe as long as you are really true to a place and you try to understand some essence of that place, however thin that is, maybe that's the trick.
I think that's a great way to wrap this thing up. And maybe Joanne, you have something you'd like to say? Or?
Is it time for questions? Sure. All right, time for questions? Yes, sir.
Well, so much is information. Let me just do a stream of consciousness. Without sounding elitist, the elephant in the room is overpopulation. Ta-da! So, obviously the lifelines of any city to create an economy, and the thundering herd walks through it. Ta-da! But the specific, you just eloquently just summed it up. The juxtaposition of Europe versus the United States. When we tore down Penn Station, with the finest marble in the world that cannot be replicated. So you imagine a city that allows itself, either because of the economy not allowing itself to tear itself down, but being forced in a ghetto of establishing history upon history upon history upon history, and forcing to navigate its social curriculum in spite of history piling upon history. That's actually very exciting to me. And I think Venice definitely specifically demonstrates that. You talk about anomalies through the evening, but what is a greater anomaly than having a forest in the middle of New York City that Europeans specifically are so in awe of? That's where they go, where it seems that we are too arrogant to even appreciate it. And I think the biggest problem, and maybe because of the collapse of the economy under the oligarchical system that's controlling so much of it, that we'll finally wake up and realize that art is the true economy, and regardless of where we are, with what we have, as Judd miraculously did with Martha, we preserve what we have even in the most benign, bucolic ineptitude of itself, but it represents a period of our history as a diary-like projection of what can possibly be. And by the way, I think Detroit is going to prove itself to be one of the most miraculous renaissance this country has ever seen. If I only had the money as a juvenile then to buy real estate at maybe 1/20th of its value, and when to finally some oligarchical mindset of real estate goes, wait a second, there's money here. Wham! Detroit's going to come back with a vengeance. And this, I think, is a microcosm of demonstration what America can ultimately pull itself up by its bootstraps. And I implore you to talk amongst your colleagues, focus on that, and demonstrate the eloquence of that history. And thank you, by the way, for tonight.
I have a very maybe non-political question, but a few years back I saw a lecture, I went to a lecture at the Met here, and it was on saving Venice. And actually, I think it ended up well, and I'm just wondering if you could give us, someone here could give us an update on what the status is of people saving it in terms of going to the city. So it's very interesting, and it didn't...
Was it a Save Venice, the
It's
organization?
the organization, right?
Yeah.
It was, I guess, the director
Yeah,
of the
they're the
organization.
not-for-profit that receives a percentage of first book. I was just asking if it was Save Venice in terms of the organization, which is absolutely incredible, which started, as many other organizations did in 1966 with the incredible floods, which you probably heard about in Florence, but Venice also really suffered. And when you ask about saving Venice, it's a very loaded question because you have to look at Venice from lots of different areas. There's the environmental question, there's the question of how are you going to save the city for the residents, of which we're losing 1,000 people a year. So at 54,000 residents, if they all go in 50 years, the city will no longer be a living city, it will be a Disneyland. So in terms of who's doing work,
I mean, specifically the sinking.
well, the sink, can I take it off?
Well, the oceans are going up 15 feet. We can't stop that.
How's that? Does that work?
Now you're
They-
a lounge there.
Yeah. I should sit up here. They are trying to do things like Mose, like the big gates that have already rusted out that probably will not work. They are doing things in terms of UNESCO coming in and putting it on the danger list to alert people. But in terms of climate change, they can't raise the city. The city's not sinking, the water is coming in and the water is rising. And that water coming in is what's destroying the foundations. It's why the stones are crumbling. So climate change is for our entire Earth. Venice can't be isolated and raise themselves up. It's not going to happen. They can do other things that are in their control, like the cruise ships, getting them out of the lagoon, because they're of course destroying the ecology of the lagoon, and the wave motion is really bad for the foundations. There are things they can do about the 30 million tourists that come in, the day trippers primarily, as Cynthia said, that come in that don't add a whole lot to the city. But in order to do all that, there's community activists, there's some wonderful academic institutions that have done fabulous research. You have to have an administration that wants the same thing. So unfortunately, in the case of Venice, they have the same mayor for another 3 years. And it is not in his personal best interest to do any of those things. So it's a big fight, and there are lots of us fighting. But it's going to be a long battle. Does that help a little bit? It's complicated.
Right.
Yeah. Any other questions? How many of you have been to Venice? Wow, wow.
Next question. Joanne, why don't you talk a little bit about how you put this book together, because it's really fascinating.
I had decided with the first book, which is called Dream of Venice, I was very, very early in the process. It became clear that it needed to be a series about the city of Venice, and it was very clear to me that it needed to be a contemporary series about Venice, because we all have the novelists that we love, that we've read, and the musicians, and I don't want to look back when we think of Venice. I want to look at the present, and I want to look forward. And I happen to love architecture, and for me, the series of books is sort of pursuing my own curiosity about the city. And when you say, I'm sure most of you have been there, you would consider it a beautiful city, right? Yeah, that's a nice looking place. Why? Why is it so beautiful? What are the elements that make it a beautiful city? And if you start really looking, you're looking at light, you're looking at color, but for me, so much of that is structure. So it became a very organic, natural thing that the second book in the series should be contemporary architects and architectural writers with their impression. Does Venice still have the capacity to change our lives? So what I was looking for when I found all these incredible people to contribute, they go, some people go to Venice and they go home and they never think about it again. I was interested in, if you go to Venice and you come home, did it have any impact on your life? Did it change your work? Did it change your viewpoint? And so that's what I was looking for in the group of architects and writers that contributed to the book. So, yeah.